So if you had to give like your 5 biggest bang for your buck exercises for an aspiring beach volleyball player.
Yeah. Definitely have a bilateral pattern that you're very comfortable with. So that just means both feet. So whether it's, if you have access to a trap bar, cool. Barbell, cool. But beach is a 2-legged sport.
Dumbbells, heavier dumbbells.
Yeah, for sure. So you're going to want to have like a squat pattern. I always recommend front squats unless you're the very strong type. Then you're going to have to go to back squat. But front squats, if you can get your wrist or your comfortable arms, I like those just because it's a little more knee dominant. But you just stay upright. When we jump, we stay upright when we sink down because we're still doing it with the ball, right? So we have to be able to stay upright. So I love front squats for that.
Does it make your hip go back more having the weight there or less?
You stay more upright. So back squat, the hips have a little bit more extension. Yeah. So both are great. But then once you get strong at that a little bit and you can move some load, then start adjusting the load to where it's going to be based on your angles, and then start exploding with it. Like, can I move this weight fast enough where I kind of pop off my heels a little bit? That's a great place to be. So that could be your squat pattern. Olympic lifts, unless you have a massive background with those as far as cleans, jerks, all that stuff, they're not... I'm going to get a lot of crap for saying this, but risk versus reward, it's just not worth it. Like, you can get just as much and actually more out of a trap bar jump than you can a hang clean.
I'll just for reference, like, I basically, every once in a while we'll do something, whatever, put something on my back, but I basically stopped Olympic lifting in college because of how it works with my back. It's almost like automatic. You make me back squat heavy, my lower back's gonna be hurting for the next week or a few days. Yeah. So it's just not for me at all. Trap bar, sure, like just the way that the weights, I don't know. It's just the balance of my body. It just doesn't work. Whereas like I have other friends who just have these big thick cores and like I think it can just handle it better. Yeah. Love it. And it's just great for their game. So yeah, I don't Olympic lift. Traditionally.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, once again, it's all going to be specific on what people are comfortable with. And if they don't have the skill set to Olympic lift, which most people don't, cool, you shouldn't be doing that. But most people can pick up a trap bar with decent form out of the box. That's going to be available at most public gyms these days. It wasn't as of 10 years ago, which makes very sad.
It's kind of like a new thing. Not new, but it's sort of like that's the newest piece of equipment that's becoming pretty consistent.
Yeah, and like I said, you can use it for your heavy stuff, and you can use it for explosive stuff too.
Yeah.
So it's very versatile.
Yeah, I'm a fan for sure.
Yeah.
But what about dumbbells? Like I'm like, isn't lifting dumbbells the same thing, but they're just a little more free in terms of like how you can.
You're going to be starting limited if you're pretty strong. You're going to be starting limited on what you can hold. It's going to be a big one. But also depends on the exercises. Like working on your breaks right now. So we have a drop catch thing where we're just holding in a dumbbell and dropping and catching it. So stuff like that, kettlebells, it's going to be fantastic.
Right.
Lunge variations, great for that. You're not going to be as strong.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you got dumbbells, then knock some heavy lunges out. It's going to be more single leg based. But if that's what you have access to, and once again, if you're not that strong, that's a great place to start.
Right. Yeah, you're not going to do 400 pounds of dumbbells, right? I don't know if they're making those.
I don't know who can hold that.
That's a good point.
Well, actually, I do. Ronnie Coleman can hold that.
Yeah, buddy.
Lightweight, baby.
Dude, I remember Phil Dahlhauser put up a picture of him doing a lunge, but he had put in marker or chalk on the back of the dumbbell, like 200 pounds. Oh. And people in the comments were like, "The thin beast, are you kidding me?"
Yeah, right.
So
with
strong.
Those noodle legs.
It's awesome.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, there was, I think during some random Olympic video, I saw Jake Gibb was back squatting like 135, and I'm like, you know what, for a man that tall, he's kind of been towards the end of his career. I was like, that's solid.
Yeah.
That's all he needs. Like, he can perform well. It's like he just maintains that resiliency with that. Hopefully he's doing some other stuff. But I was just like, yeah, that's my point. Like, you don't need a ton of strength. You need to have a baseline. And then from there, you don't need to really lift that heavy anymore. Yeah.
We got our squats.
Yeah, some kind of squat pattern.
Trap bar.
You can use. Now, like I said, that trap bar jumps are great. If you're really tall, elevate them off the ground. Just throw them on a couple of bumper plates. Jump from there. You can do them straight off the ground, where it's concentric only, where you're there, you're upright. Make sure your knees are forward, so it's quads, not jumping with your butt. To start off with, and then you can also go from the ground on those, and then you can do the counter movement up down with the trap bar. But I usually recommend doing the counter movement stuff pretty light because we want that to be building the speed. So a couple 10-pound dumbbells, to your point, up down real fast. That's going to be a big one for jumping in the sand. So I have multiple variations of those that we'll use depending. Box jumps, I'm a huge fan of, especially for beach, just because it takes the landing out of it. Mm-hmm. So when you land, you're landing with hundreds of pounds of force. And if you're used to it, cool, you're not going to notice it, but that's just a lot of accumulated fatigue that we don't have to have.
Right.
So find you a box, try not to land on hard ground, jump onto a box, especially in season. That's going to be a big one. It's such a small thing, but probably don't have
make some stairs down. I've noticed that. You're like,
yeah,
because if it's really high, you're doing like almost like a one-legged like iso squat. Like that's gonna build up too.
That
if
adds
you do
up
10
quick.
more of those.
yeah, and you're just like, why am I getting so tired in between this? Yeah, because if you fall from like 2 or 3 feet up, and you like if you set a force plates and you land on those, and you're 700 pounds of force when you land. I'm like, that's pretty exhausting for your legs to take on top of the pounding your joints are taking.
Sure.
So yeah, man, if you're gonna do some jump stuff, use a box, especially in season. So let's see, that's like 3, right? Box jumps.
And a lot of times what you'll do with me is you'll pair squats with box jumps, or pair trap bar with box jump, or something like that.
Yeah, so that's kind of, you can get that's just a easy way of put something moderately heavy with a similar pattern with something light and explosive. So we call that contrast training.
Yeah.
So very, very common in the S&C world, not so common in the everyday gym world. So it's simple. Pick something that feels similar to each other, move a moderate or a light load, medium to semi-fast, and then go move your body fast. Mm-hmm. So a sprint move or a jump move or whatever. But especially if it's a similar pattern, that's just a super easy way to get a lot of bang for your buck. So do a squat pattern, go do a box jump. Super, super simple. But just notice that kind of, you get that bar off your back, and all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, I feel super light right now. Yeah, that's called the potentiation effect. So then at that point, nervous system is super ramped. Go move your fast thing. Do a few weeks of that. Your body gets used to doing that extra fast thing it couldn't do without that potentiation. And then #gains.
So exercise 4 in our Nathan's bang for the buck.
Definitely get some single leg work. So even though we're in a bilateral sport, it's a very uneven surface as far as balance and stuff. If you don't move in sand, you're just like, oh my God.
We also jump. I know it's different, but most people jump with left foot forward, like a right-handed hitter's jumping with the left foot a bit forward. I know it's different with certain people.
Yeah, we call that your block foot. Yeah.
Yeah, but some people are pretty close to even too, which I didn't realize. But I'm solid 6 inches.
Well, I think it might depend on what side you play too, because you're already on the left, so your approach is angled. Yeah. So your left foot's naturally going to be. Is it a little bit forward? So for me, it's my right foot would be more forward.
Well, it's how open do you want your hips to be when you start, right? Some people don't really open up, and they're more forward, like Phil.
Right.
Like Phil would guess, even on the left, because he's goofy-footed, right?
Yeah.
It's probably even. Anyway, yeah,
that's going to come from your indoor
times.
background. Because if you jump on court, if you come in with any kind of speed, your body has to slow down that force created and then go vertical. Well, okay, your foot's going to turn. That's why we call it the block foot, because it comes off in a block position and it allows you to then create your force upwards.
Oh, got you.
That's typically how you should jump. But if people grew up in the sand, that's the only sport they've played, you might see some semi-parallel foot. I've seen a couple people do that. Yeah. And once again, if they're efficient, okay,
right,
cool.
Totally.
But yeah.
Single leg work.
Single leg.
There's, you got single leg RDLs. Mm-hmm. What do you think about Bulgarian split squats? Because that's a lot of people do those.
Yeah, no, if somebody is really uncomfortable having a bar on their back or they're just not comfortable with heavier loads in general, great, man. That's cool. Single leg with the rear foot elevated. We call them RFEs, but classic term is Bulgarians, even though they did not come up with it. Pet peeve of mine. You got Romanian things and Russian things and American. Like, dude, none of these countries have had anything to do with these exercises. But we just start throwing random ass countries in front of these. Like sounds cool, Bulgarians. Yeah, they're tough asses over there. Do you know anything about Bulgaria? Like, so when the rear foot's elevated is a great way to build some legitimate strength. It'll transfer very nicely to pretty much anything you want to do. So yeah, when we've done variations, if I feel like, so for your knee, they're going to be really good as well. Like knee stuff, like single leg strength work is just imperative.
And you want to be doing it to the point where you're getting a nice stretch in your hip flexor as well. Is that part of it, or you're not really? That's not really part of it.
You can if I'm dealing with somebody who's somebody who gets deep into their hip angles when they jump. Yeah, I'll have you go a little deeper. But if you're like somebody, let's say a 6'4", 6'5" female or a 6'8", 6'9" male, you're just not going to be getting that deep. So at that point, we just adjust accordingly. So what I usually do is warm up sets. I'll have you do the classic like super deep warm ups, ass to grass, as they say, ATG. But those should not be your working sets. Working sets are going to be in more of the specific angles. I won't call out names, but there's one female I saw training. I watched her move on the court, then I watched her work out, lifting these heavy loads in these very, very non-specific patterns, and I'm just like, why? Why? Like, use that strength and then put it in a slightly more specific way. Like, but yeah, you should be able to squat ass to grass or go all the way down on the Bulgarians. But then when you get into your loading working sets, whether you're working for a little bit more speed or full strength, should be slightly more specific.
And when you're doing the Bulgarians, because there's a lot of different schools of thought on this, are you going knees over toes, or are you sort of sinking back, like so it's more of a glute lift?
So what feels strongest is where I go with athletes.
Okay.
Like if you're a bodybuilder, you can get specific in those joint angle things, and where's the most of the stretch coming from in what muscle group is going to be a big part of hypertrophy. But generally speaking, I want my athletes to typically train lower body days barefoot anyway, or in socks. So at that point, I want you to become a foot whisperer. Listen to your foot if you're on a single exercise. It knows how to balance. It will find your strongest angles naturally. So get your big toe, pinky toe, and heel all kind of think about it as a tripod driven through the ground, and then just listen to it as you go up and down, and it'll put you in the right places typically.
Awesome. And are we doing dumbbells in either hand or dumbbells in one hand?
If you're trying to do it as more of a cool, I see this person could use a little bit more balance work, you can go one side or the other, depending on contralateral or ipsilateral.
Got it.
And then if you're working on more on strength, then both hands, no problem.
Got it.
Yeah. And then, as far as RDL stuff, I only have 5, but...
What does RDL stand for?
Romanian deadlifts. Oh, my God.
Thank goodness for the Romanians.
If building those for them, man, nobody would have invented this exercise, and nobody would have hamstrings or glutes.
No one would
ever.
No one would have found it out.
Yoga pants wouldn't even be. You would
not be
butts.
Yeah, those of us in the South would look terrible in a set of Wranglers. I mean, thank God for the Romanians. But I'm a big proponent of the single leg Romanian stuff. Like it's. And I typically do landmine versions. A decently loaded up single leg RDL is pretty hard. Most people can't do it. You're going to be falling over, or you're just not going to be getting up to the loads that you could be using. So, landmine is a great version of that. And then you can get a little snappy on the way up too, because even though you're on one leg, you can still kind of drive the hand into the bar a little bit. So you can either go heavy or you can go snappy on those. And so you're mildly unstable while also being stable. So I'm a big fan of those. And then for beach players, since like I said, that one study is like, oh cool, more hip flexion, we sink deeper. All right, cool. That means more glutes are going to be involved. So then at that point, your bridges, are going to come into play as well. We'll call it kind of like a 5.5. I've created a couple of different tempos and variations that I thought would be a little bit more specific to sports. So the drop, hop, hip thrust.
Yeah.
So instead of going all the way from the ground to the top, I start at the top, free fall about halfway down, and then explode back up and catch it. So we're working on that rate of force development in those hips. So if you can get your glutes to fire fast, that can help you jump higher in the sand, which is not something that I would do for a basketball player. I mean, you want to be strong in the glutes, but they're not a massive supplier of force for jumping, especially if you're like a one-legged jumper.
Yeah.
Like your knee bends maybe 10 to 15 degrees and you explode.
So that's more quad.
Yeah. That's going to be your relaxing properties through your tendons and then a lot of quad.
Well, you mentioned with squatting how you want your athletes to squat through the quad more than the glute. Mm-hmm. I know there's like, especially nowadays, like everyone's kind of realizing the knees over toes kind of thing. I know that's a trendy thing, but
yeah.
What's the thought process on that? Because like I've also been taught at time doing both, but you do want to sit back as well sometimes, like trying to really make it more of a glute squat. Or I've heard both.
Yeah. So once again, like as far as that, when I'm using that front squat as the primary strength or power builder for the quads.
Right.
Like that's the goal. If you do end up deeper in a squat, back or front, otherwise, then the glutes contribute a lot more. But for those, unless you're trying to just train the glutes in multiple ways, whether it's for hypertrophy, then that would be useful. But deep squats, back or front, just aren't going to be as beneficial. Like if you feel like you need more glute power from the glutes or the hamstrings, then go pick an exercise. It's going to be a little more specific for that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, anything that's going to have a deep knee bend, it's just you got to think quad first.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to do any squat and like make your glutes burn before your quads. Right, like no matter how far back you're trying to sit, like
so
I feel it in my quads. Like,
and then I mean, but everybody's different. Like I used to actually get really sore glutes from back squatting, and that's because I would get deep, and I naturally have a stronger posterior chain than I do anterior. And everybody just has their thing. Like
that's interesting.
Yeah, so back in my day, in the football days, I would work out with the football players in high school, and I could squat with the strongest guys. But then they would bench 3 times what I did. Sure, So everybody's just built a little bit different. I've always been posterior chain dominant. I've had to work on my quad strength a lot. So it's just, that's why it always depends. Like if I can see somebody can squat 400 pounds, but you can only, I'm just making up numbers, but deadlift, say 200. I'm like, well, that's backwards. I'm like, okay, cool. You're a very anterior dominant athlete. Or vice versa. So that's another thing is when people have kind of deficiencies.
Yeah, I'm actually curious. Like I never really heard someone be like, I've heard like quad dominant or chest or something, but I've never really thought about it for myself, like which I am. I think I'm messed up. I definitely got quads. Wrong. I got legs.
Yeah.
But I'm so like sucked forward like this all the time. Like my neck, literally for like a decade, neck and traps just like won't relax. Chest isn't that strong. I mean, we don't do a ton of chest. We want to keep it, but like, I don't feel like my back's like super strong in any particular. Maybe I don't know. I've never really thought about
wiry. It's like in the replacements.
Wiry. I don't know what I am.
Yeah, I
got quads.
Yeah. Well, people that have a lot of tension up here, typically there's not always, like everybody's different.
Yeah.
I'm sure your coach takes care of it, but sometimes there's just little deficiencies like on all the muscles in between and below the scapula.
Scaps,
Like, all right, cool. You just like those muscles could use just a little more love so they can actually pull everything back this direction.
It's so hard when you like pass a million balls.
Exactly.
Set a million balls.
Yeah.
And then for me, like too, I feel like I'm a little more like I like protract like a crazy amount when I block.
Yeah,
like
and
I try to round out my blocks.
And that's a good thing. Like you want your scapula to be able to move.
Yeah, well, it hurts. my clavicles are like popping and clicking and all over the place.
Oh man. Talk to me after. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
So yeah, so everybody's gonna be. That's honestly that's why I said I like training with people one-on-one, because I can really figure out kind of where they're at different places, and that's the cool thing about the force plates and me when I watch people in the sand. I can just watch somebody jump, and based on how they do it, I'd be like, okay, cool. You organize your body in this way, which means you're gonna be using these muscles the most, and I'm like, all right, cool. And then from there, that kind of gives me a baseline from a visual standpoint, and then like I said, the force plates that I have now, I can kind of watch people how they jump, and I'd be like, all right, cool, a lot of quad or a lot of hams and glutes, or they're missing ankle flexion, hip flexion, whatever it may be. And then at that point, all right, if you're tight somewhere, especially in the sand, I'm realizing recently that ankle mobility is more important. Just because we do have to get in deeper positions, and the knees need to drive forward, and if they can't do that, that's when you end up with that butt first jumper where the blocker, like their chest just sinks all the way down, and then comes all the way back up. You know, like, all right, man, it's probably ankles, unless you have tight hips, which also can be a thing. But it's finding all that and then releasing the Kraken at that point. But like once we get stuff open, the power comes out. Because I'm like, you've been jumping with freaking hamstrings, and that's it. Like these are your primary drivers, and because your ankles suck, you don't have access to it as much.
I've definitely, I mean, my ankles have just been, I had posterior impingement on one side. Actually had a cyst build up. But then it's funny because like that friction's kind of always there. Whatever's, you know, I had surgery on it. But then the other side started pinching a little bit on the front. So the front of the right ankle and the back of the left ankle. I'm like, that can't be good. Man. That can't be good on the knees. Like, oh, it's weird that my knee hurts. Not really.
Yeah. That's to do that to that point. I mean, that's the thing. Is like obviously everyone knows the kinetic chain works together. If you start walking wrong because of a sprained ankle, your knees and hips are going to get out of alignment probably. And then if you don't let that come back to normal, then 5 years down the line, it could become a major issue. So yeah, you want to have each joint mobile. You want to have each joint strong, and then you want to have each muscle group strong. And then like that's why I say you can't go wrong with strong.